She picked up the floral arrangement, a hand-tied bouquet of garden roses and dried pampas grass that Mara Osei had spent 4 hours constructing that morning, and dropped it on the floor. Not knocked over, not fumbled. Placed it down deliberately, stem end up, like setting aside something that had offended her by existing. Then she turned to face Mara and said, in a voice that had the particular texture of someone accustomed to not being contradicted, "Start over. These aren't what I asked for." Mara Osei looked at the bouquet on the floor. She looked at the woman who had dropped it. Then she looked at her assistant, a young man named Theo, who had been with her for 2 years and had learned in that time to read the specific stillness that came over Mara's face when she was deciding something. She was deciding something. "Are you certain you'd like me to start over?" Mara asked. The woman, her name was Phoebe Calloway, soon to be Phoebe Ashworth, and she was marrying a man named Gregory Ashworth at 2 o'clock that afternoon at the Kestrel Ridge estate, lifted her chin the way certain people do when they consider a question beneath them. "I know what I asked for," Phoebe said. Mara nodded once, said nothing else. She bent down and picked the bouquet up off the floor herself, set it gently on the workbench behind her, and turned back to the arrangement table with her hands folded in front of her. She hadn't told Phoebe who she was. She had learned, over the years, that people revealed themselves much more completely when they didn't know. And Phoebe Calloway was revealing quite a lot. Mara Osei was 41 years old, and had been building things quietly for so long that the quiet had become part of her brand. She grew up in Brampton, the second of 4 children, raised by parents who had come from Ghana with 2 suitcases, and a philosophy about work that didn't require explanation, because it was demonstrated daily. Her mother had cleaned offices at night and sold homemade pepper sauce on weekends. Her father drove transit for 22 years and never once called in sick. Mara had absorbed their arithmetic early. You do the work, you do it better than anyone expects, and you do not make the mistake of waiting for someone to notice. She had started with flowers, a summer job at a flower market in Scarborough when she was 16, and something about the work had stayed with her. The logic of it, the way a single arrangement could shift the entire emotional temperature of a room. She studied design. She worked for other people for 10 years. The kind of years that teach you everything the school didn't. And then, carefully, without announcing it to anyone who wasn't directly involved, she started building her own operation. Osei Studio had been operating out of a converted warehouse in the East End of Toronto for 9 years. It employed 11 full-time staff and a rotating team of seasonal contractors. They did corporate installations, gallery openings, private events, and most lucratively, high-end weddings. The studio had been featured in 3 national publications and 1 American one, which Mara found mildly embarrassing and mostly useful for quoting in proposals. But Osei Studio was not the whole of it. 6 years ago, Mara had made a different kind of investment. Kestrel Ridge Estate, a converted Victorian property on 40 acres outside of Caledon, had come onto the market at a moment when the previous owners had run out of patience and Mara had run out of reasons to wait. She purchased it quietly, renovated it slowly, and turned it into what it was now. One of the most sought-after private event venues in the Greater Toronto area, with a waitlist that stretched 14 months and a per-event minimum that made most corporate event planners audibly exhale when they read it. She didn't introduce herself as the owner at events. She had discovered early on that people treated her differently when they knew. Not worse necessarily, just differently. And differently, in her experience, was rarely better. So she wore her studio jacket, worked alongside her team, and let people form whatever assumptions they formed. Most assumed she was a vendor. She had learned to find this more useful than insulting. Most of the time. Phoebe Calloway had booked Kestrel Ridge 11 months ago. Through the estate's client coordinator, a meticulous woman named Sandra, who had worked with Mara since year 3, and had the particular gift of managing difficult clients without letting them know they were being managed. Phoebe's file, which Sandra had forwarded to Mara with a single raised eyebrow emoji and no other commentary, contained 47 emails, 3 formal complaints about response times, and 1 message sent at 12:43 in the morning that used the phrase, "This is simply not acceptable," 4 times in reference to a font choice on a PDF menu draft. The floral commission had come separately. Phoebe had encountered Mara's work at a fundraising gala 8 months earlier, and contacted the studio directly, unaware of the connection to the estate. Mara had taken the commission personally because the design concept interested her. A ceremony installation built around suspended dried grasses and hand-conditioned garden roses, in a specific palette of blush, ivory, and sage, and because Theo had drafted a structural plan for the suspended canopy that she wanted to see executed properly. They had built it that morning. Theo and 2 junior florists up at 4:30 to drive the van out to Caledon, and by 9:15 the ceremony arch and suspended installation were in place. Mara had stood at the back of the ceremony space and looked at it for a long moment. The light came through the estate's east windows at that hour in a particular way that she had noticed before and never managed to fully describe. Something between gold and copper, something that made even plain arrangements look deliberate. This one, in that light, was not plain. That's the best canopy we've built, Theo said, beside her. Yes, Mara agreed because it was. That was at 9:40. By 11, Phoebe had arrived. She came in the way certain people arrive at places they've paid a great deal of money to occupy. As though the space owes them something beyond what's written in the contract. Her maid of honor, a woman named Fiona who had the fixed smile of someone on hour 6 of a very long shift, trailed behind her along with 2 other bridesmaids and a wedding planner named Dominique, who walked with the efficient energy of a woman running calculations in her head at all times. Phoebe moved through the ceremony space without looking at the installation for the first 30 seconds. She was talking about something else, the parking arrangement for the shuttle buses, which was not Mara's department. And then she turned and saw it and she stopped. Mara stepped forward. Good morning. I'm Mara from Osei Studio. I handled the design personally, if you'd like. Phoebe wasn't looking at her. She was looking at the installation, and her expression was doing something Mara couldn't immediately read. Then she looked at Mara, and the expression resolved itself into something Mara could read very easily. She had spent her entire adult life learning to read it. It was the particular recalibration that happened behind certain people's eyes when they processed her presence, her face, her braids, her studio jacket, and found that it didn't match whatever picture they'd assembled in their minds of who should be standing in a room like this, doing work like this. You built this? Phoebe said. Not a question, a small flat verdict. My team and I, yes. Phoebe walked slowly toward the arch, circling it. The light was still doing what it had been doing an hour ago. If anything, it was better now. Mara watched her look at it. The roses on the left side are lower than the right, Phoebe said. Theo, beside the van entrance 20 feet away, looked up. Mara said, I can take a look at any specific. The dried grasses. These aren't pampas. Phoebe reached out and touched a stem without asking. They're feather reed grass. The contract specification was dried ornamental grasses, and feather reed in this length and conditioning gives a more. I know what I specified. Phoebe's voice had shifted. Harder, more deliberate. What I'm questioning is whether the person who designed this actually understood the brief, or whether this is the standard of work I should have expected given who I hired. The room had gone quiet. Fiona had stopped smiling. Dominique had stopped writing on her tablet. The 2 bridesmaids behind them were doing the particular thing people do when they want to disappear from a situation they can't leave. Going very still and looking at the floor. Phoebe turned to face Mara directly. I'm going to be honest with you, she said. When I booked this commission, I wasn't fully aware of. She paused and her eyes moved across Mara in the specific way that wasn't about the jacket or the braids but was entirely about both. I have certain standards for this wedding, and I'm not confident that the person standing in front of me right now. Phoebe. Fiona said it quietly. Almost a warning. Phoebe ignored her. She walked to the boutonniere display on the workbench, the arrangement of sample stems Theo had laid out for the groom's party, and picked up one of the hand-tied posies, turned it over, set it down harder than necessary. Then she walked to the bouquet. Mara had spent 4 hours on that morning and picked it up, and she dropped it. The sound it made on the stone floor of the estate's entry corridor was small and final. I want new florals, everything redone, and I want it done by someone else. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence. The kind that happens when a room full of people are each privately deciding what they're willing to pretend they didn't see. Mara looked at the bouquet on the floor for a moment, then at Phoebe. Are you certain that's what you'd like? She said. Her voice had not changed temperature. It had not needed to. Don't make me repeat myself. Mara nodded. Give us a few minutes to arrange that, she said. She picked the bouquet up herself, set it on the bench, gave Theo a look that communicated everything necessary, without requiring words, and then walked, calmly, down the estate's east corridor to a room she knew very well. Because she had chosen the paint color for its walls, and the hardware for its doors, and the desk that sat in the center of it, she sat down. She made 3 phone calls. The first was to her estate manager, a man named Franklin, who she asked to compile the morning's incident report and pull security footage from the corridor and the ceremony space. The second was to her lawyer. The third was to Sandra. I know, Sandra said, before Mara could speak. I saw the corridor camera. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize. Just make sure she doesn't leave the property before I've had a chance to speak with her. A pause. And Sandra, don't tell her why. The wedding was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. By 12:30, Kestrel Ridge looked the way it always looked on event days, immaculate and unhurried, the particular quality of a place that understands its own value and doesn't perform it. The ceremony space was dressed and lit. The garden terrace was set for cocktail hour. The main hall had been laid for the dinner reception, with the table installations Mara's team had completed 2 days earlier. arrangements of ivory ranunculus and olive branches in low mercury glass vessels, running the length of each table with the precision of work that knows it's good. The suspended canopy remained exactly as Mara's team had built it. Phoebe had spent the hour after the bouquet incident on the phone with a florist in Orangeville, scrambling for a last-minute replacement arrangement. The price they quoted her for same-day work was, by any reasonable measure, punishing. She paid it. She had handled it. The morning's unpleasantness was behind her. The woman from the studio was gone, and the day would progress as planned. What Phoebe did not know was that Mara had not left. She had changed. The Osei studio jacket was gone. In its place, a well-cut charcoal blazer she kept in the estate office closet for exactly the kind of afternoon she was now having. She sat at the head of the conference table. The table inside the building. Phoebe had walked through all morning as though she owned it, and waited while Franklin arranged the documentation in front of her. Security footage, time-stamped. Written incident accounts from Theo, from the junior florists, from 2 estate staff members who had been in the corridor. The event contract, 12 pages which Phoebe Calloway had signed 11 months ago. Open to Section 9 subsection 3. Conduct Standards and Vendor Relations. The clause had been drafted after a different incident 4 years ago, with a different client, and Mara had made sure it was comprehensive. It covered intentional destruction of vendor property, abusive conduct towards staff and contractors, and discriminatory behavior directed at service personnel on estate grounds. The remedies available under it were substantial. Franklin set the compiled folder in front of her and said, "The replacement florals are arriving at 1:15. She's in the bridal suite. She thinks everything is under control." "Good," Mara said. "Send someone to bring her here. Keep it casual. Tell her there's a minor scheduling matter for the afternoon." He nodded and left. Mara sat for a moment in the quiet of the room. Outside, through the window, the Calden landscape ran all the way to the tree line. She had stood in this room many times over the past 6 years in many different states of mind. What she noticed right now was that she was entirely calm. Phoebe kept her waiting 19 minutes. When the office door finally opened, Phoebe entered mid-conversation, speaking to Fiona over her shoulder about something to do with the shuttle timing. Then she turned to face the room and stopped. The conference table, 6 chairs, Franklin standing near the window, Sandra seated to Mara's left with a laptop open in front of her. Mara at the head in the charcoal blazer, completely still. Phoebe's eyes moved across the room and landed on Mara, and something happened behind them that was different from the recalibration of the morning. This was the beginning of a different kind of processing entirely. "What is this?" Phoebe said. "I thought you left." "I work here," Mara said, which was accurate as far as it went. "I want to speak to whoever manages this property." "There are afternoon logistics. I manage this property," Mara said, a beat of silence. "Franklin handles daily operations," she continued. "Sandra manages client accounts, but Kestrel Ridge belongs to me. It has for 6 years." A pause. "I should have introduced myself more fully this morning. That was my oversight." Phoebe stared at her. "You own this place," she said. The words came out with the flat affect of someone who has just discovered that the floor they thought was solid has different properties than advertised. "I do." Fiona, standing in the doorway behind Phoebe, put her hand briefly over her mouth. Phoebe's composure made a visible effort to reassemble itself. "Even so," she said. "I don't see what this has to do with." "You have a complaint about a contractor," Mara said, "and I have documentation of an incident that occurred on my property this morning." She nodded toward the folder. Sandra turned the laptop to face the center of the table and began playing the security footage. No audio. Clear, well-lit, time-stamped. Phoebe entering the corridor, the bouquet, her hands on it, the deliberate placement on the floor, the room of people watching. Phoebe looked at the screen, then at the wall above it. "The florals didn't meet my specifications. The commission contract specifies ornamental dried grasses and garden roses in blush, ivory, and sage. Theo can open that document alongside this footage if you'd like to review them at the same time." Mara's voice had the quality of a room at a stable temperature. "What happened this morning was the deliberate destruction of property. Property commissioned through my studio, which makes it mine. What you said to me and to my team in the ceremony space before that constitutes conduct that directly violates Section 9 of the agreement you signed when you booked this estate." She slid the contract across the table. Section 9 subsection 3 highlighted in yellow. "I'm prepared to offer you 2 options," Mara said. "I'd suggest taking a few minutes to read through them." Phoebe didn't touch the contract. Her jaw was working at something she wasn't saying. "You can't cancel my wedding," she said. "That's option 1, Mara said. "The clause gives me the right to terminate the event agreement for cause, effective immediately. I have footage, written staff accounts, and a signed contract. My lawyer has already reviewed all of it this morning. You're doing this because I complained about the flowers. I'm doing this because you destroyed property that belonged to me, made statements to my team that I have on record, and violated a contract you signed. The complaint about the flowers I could have had a conversation about. She let that settle. The other things are different. Out in the corridor something had shifted. Voices, low but present. Franklin had been discreet, but there are limits to discretion when a bride disappears from her own wedding preparations. 40 minutes before the ceremony, and her bridal party starts asking questions. Fiona had already moved back into the hallway. 2 other bridesmaids were visible further down the corridor, and behind them Mara could see this clearly from where she sat. A man in a morning suit, moving with the careful pace of someone who has been told, secondhand, that something is wrong and doesn't yet know how wrong. Gregory Ashworth was taller than he looked in the client file. He had the face of a man who was genuinely trying to understand something before reacting to it. He stopped in the corridor, said something quietly to one of the bridesmaids, and looked toward the office door. Mara looked at Phoebe. Option 2, she said. The wedding proceeds as planned. In exchange, full compensation for the damaged property, a formal written apology from you to Theo and the members of my team who were present this morning, and a signed acknowledgement of the conduct violation on file with this office. Phoebe said nothing. I'd decide soon, Mara said. Your guests have been here for 20 minutes. The door behind Phoebe opened fully. Gregory stepped inside. He looked at his future wife's face, then at the room, then at the open laptop and the folder on the table. He was the kind of man who processed things quickly and didn't pretend otherwise. What's going on, he said. Nobody answered immediately. He looked at Mara. Can someone tell me what's happened? Gregory, Phoebe said. This is a vendor issue. I'll handle it. It's not a vendor issue, Fiona said from the doorway. She said it with the careful, deliberate tone of someone who has been holding something in for a long time and has decided that this particular moment is the one to let it go. Gregory turned to her. She dropped the bouquet on the floor, Fiona said. On purpose, after she stopped, started again. She said things to the florist, the way she said them. Gregory, I need you to see the footage, Fiona. Phoebe's voice was sharp. No. Fiona said it gently but without hesitation, the way you say a word when you've waited long enough to mean it completely. No, I'm not going to. Not this time. Sandra turned the laptop so Gregory could see the screen. He watched it without speaking. He watched his fiancée pick up a hand-tied bouquet of roses and drop it on the floor. He watched the room of people around her go still in the particular way that rooms go still when they're witnessing something they're not sure how to respond to. He watched Mara, the woman now seated across from him, calm, steady, watching him watch it, respond to the whole thing with a single question and a nod. When the footage ended, Gregory looked at Phoebe for a long time. Tell me there's context I'm missing, he said. There's context you're not. This is being presented in a way that. Tell me that's not what it looks like. The silence that followed was longer than it needed to be, and everyone in the room understood what that length meant. Phoebe's voice had lost some of its register. The whole morning was wrong. I was frustrated and the bouquet was the best work I've produced this year, said a voice from just outside the door. Theo had been standing in the corridor for 3 minutes. Mara hadn't summoned him. He had come on his own. He stepped partway into the doorway. He was 26, and he was not someone who raised his voice or made scenes, which was part of why what he said next landed the way it did. I was there for 4 hours this morning, he said. He was looking at Gregory, not at Phoebe. I got up at 4:30, I drove out in the dark, and what she said to Mara he stopped. It wasn't about the flowers. Gregory looked at Theo for a moment, then back at Phoebe. Was it about the flowers, he said. The corridor had filled, not noisily. This was not a noisy situation, but with the particular weight of several people who have stopped pretending not to listen. A few guests had drifted close to the entrance. 2 members of the groom's family stood near the garden door. The estate staff moved at a reduced pace that was not quite stopping but was very close to it. Phoebe understood in that moment what had happened. Not because Mara had engineered a confrontation. She had done very little, dramatically speaking. She had sat at the head of a table in her own building and presented facts in a calm voice, and the world had organized itself accordingly.
I need a moment,
Phoebe said, with Gregory.
Privately.
Of course, Mara said. She stood, nodded to Franklin and Sandra, and the 3 of them moved into the corridor. Theo fell in beside her. She stopped near the east window and looked out at the grounds, the ceremony space visible in the distance, the white chairs arranged in clean rows, the suspended canopy holding its structure exactly as designed. You didn't have to come in there, she said to Theo. He shrugged one shoulder. Yeah, he said, I did. She didn't argue with him. They waited 14 minutes. When the door opened, Gregory came out first. His face had the particular quality of someone who has done something that cost him something and who has made the choice anyway. He looked at Mara directly. I want to apologize, he said. On behalf of. He stopped, started again. What happened to your team this morning was wrong. Whatever you need from us to make it right, I'll make sure it happens. I appreciate that, Mara said. Is the event, are we still? That depends on Phoebe. Phoebe came out of the office behind him. She looked like a woman who had been inside an argument with herself and come out on the less certain side of it. The particular armor she had been wearing all morning, the money-backed certainty, the practiced delivery of someone who had never been genuinely held accountable in a room full of witnesses, had developed structural problems somewhere in those 14 minutes. She looked at Mara. She looked at Theo. She said, "I want to apologize to both of you." The words were worked over, careful, but they came. "What I said this morning," a pause. "It had nothing to do with the flowers. It wasn't fair, and it was—" She stopped, looked at the floor, looked back up. "It was wrong." Mara held her gaze for a moment, not coldly, not with satisfaction, with the steady attention of someone who has heard what she needed to hear and is deciding what to do with it. She looked at Theo, he looked at Phoebe. "Thank you," he said. And then, because he was who he was, he said, "The bouquet was honestly one of the better things I've made. I'm sorry you didn't get to carry it." Something in Phoebe's expression shifted, quietly, the way things shift when they're real rather than performed. "Me too," she said, and meant it. Mara turned to Franklin. "Can we get the afternoon back on schedule?" Franklin checked his watch, already reaching for his radio. 12 minutes, he said. "We're good." The ceremony began at 2:17. The walled garden held the afternoon light in the specific way that walled gardens do, contained, gold, slightly warmer than the air outside. The 220 guests sat in the rows that Mara's team had arranged that morning at 5 o'clock. Gregory waited at the arch under the suspended canopy of feather reed grass and hand-conditioned garden roses. And when he saw it properly for the first time, he looked up at it for a long moment before looking back toward the garden entrance. The replacement bouquet from Orangeville was competent. It was fresh and professionally constructed, and it was, in every measurable way, a lesser thing than what had been dropped on the floor of the corridor at 11 that morning. A few of the bridesmaids glanced at it during the processional and didn't say anything. Mara spent most of the afternoon in the parts of the estate guests never thought about. Supply logistics, the kitchen coordination for the dinner service, a walkthrough of the terrace drainage issue she'd been meaning to address before autumn. She did the work the way she always did it, with the particular quality of attention that doesn't announce itself. At one point, Franklin found her in the service corridor reviewing vendor invoices and said, "She actually apologized to Theo properly. I mean really properly, after the ceremony." Mara looked up from the invoice. "Good. You're not going to say anything else about it," she thought for a moment. "People are capable of more than the worst version of themselves shows. That doesn't excuse the worst version, but it's worth keeping track of." Franklin nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment. "You're patient in a way I don't fully understand. I've had teachers," she said, and went back to the invoice. The last guests left Kestrel Ridge at 9:10 that evening. Mara locked the main house herself. She always did, on event days, a final walk through the spaces while the cleanup crew finished, checking the rooms, restoring things to the quiet order she had spent 6 years building this place to hold. She stopped in the ceremony space. The canopy was still up. It would come down tomorrow morning when the crew returned with the proper equipment to disassemble the suspended rigging, without damaging the ceiling hooks. In the last of the evening light coming through the east windows, different now, amber rather than copper, the day folding itself away, the feather reed grass moved slightly in the draft from the open garden door. It was still, she thought, a very good installation. She turned off the light, walked through the east corridor, past the office where the afternoon had been decided, past the ceremony entrance, where a woman had dropped a bouquet on a stone floor, and discovered a few hours later that the stone floor belonged to someone she had not looked at carefully enough. Outside, the 40 acres were dark and quiet. The tree line at the far edge of the property was a black shape against a dark blue sky. The parking area was empty. The shuttle had made its last run. Mara stood on the front steps of the estate for a moment before getting in her car, the way she often did after events, not thinking about anything in particular, just letting the day settle. There was a phrase her mother used to say, in Twi, that translated roughly into English as, "The person who looks past you will one day need to look for you." She had thought about it many times over the years. She thought about it now, not with any sharpness, just with the mild satisfaction of someone who has seen an old idea, confirmed once again by the evidence. Kestrel Ridge had hosted 184 weddings under her ownership. Every one of them had been different. Every one of them had been memorable, to the people who mattered in each one. This one, she suspected, would be remembered differently by different people. Gregory would remember the canopy, and the moment he looked up at it. Fiona would remember the corridor, and what it felt like to finally say the things she had been not saying for a long time. Theo would remember the floor of the estate, and what he had chosen to do with his 4:30 morning. And Phoebe, Mara did not know what Phoebe would remember. That was Phoebe's work to do and no one else's. Mara got into her car. She drove back toward the city with the windows down and the highway quiet, the dark countryside giving way by degrees to the first distant lights of Toronto, and she thought about the next thing on her list, which was the terrace drainage and a vendor meeting on Thursday, and a new commission that had come in from a gallery in the distillery district that she was genuinely looking forward to designing. She had work to do. She always had work to do. That had never once felt like a burden. It was, she had long understood the whole point.